Hiya folks, it's Kikoskia here, and welcome back to another audio-only video, whose topic remains a mystery! Unless, of course, you've read the title of the video, whereupon it is no longer a mystery. Funny how titles work like that. This video contains no gameplay or music whatsoever, allowing you to focus on whatever it is you're up to. But if it did contain music, that would be quite apt, considering that I'm going to be talking about music in video games. It's odd to think of it now, but video games didn't start off with having music, and even when they did have music, it wasn't persistent music. It was typically just a couple of beeps at the very beginning of you starting a new game, and then it was silence, interrupted only by the sound effects of what you were doing in the game. Some could argue that the sound effects could be melodic in their own way, but that's not the same as music. Music is, as it sounds, a background track of music that plays while you're playing the game. And me saying as it sounds, I realise, is quite puntastic. Perhaps this video will be the most puntastic of them all. It probably won't be. But every time a pun happens, you've got to cherish it. Cherish puns, embrace them, become one with the puns. The music of video games developed and became more advanced as the technology progressed. But it did reach an eventual point where it was indistinguishable from what people listened to when they were listening to their favourite artists, and that was when the CD became the prominent medium of storage for games. That was when Red Book audio came about, and the ability to just have tracks put into a game and read off the CD as if it was a CD player. Before then, the people working on games had to work with the limitations of the systems, much like the games themselves, as I said. So the Game Boy only had so many channels and so many instruments, and the same with the NES and the Mega Drive and Master System, and so on and so forth. It created a very distinctive sound, very telltale noises and effects that are distinctly theirs. For those who played those consoles, they will know and immediately recognise tracks from that system even when they haven't played the game themselves, because they are so distinctive. But how important is music in a video game? It's so important that I go so far as to say that music can make or break a game. There are games that I have wanted to play that I really despise the music for, and thus didn't play. And there are games that I wasn't entirely sure of that I was persuaded to give a go because of the music. And there are many, many games that I have not played and probably will never play, but the music is so fantastic that I listen to it anyhow. Generally, there are two ways that music is created for a game. There is music that is created in tandem with the game's development and is made specifically for it, and then there is music that is made with a more hands-off approach where someone is given a mandate of you've got to make this kind of music, and then they make it, and then it is slotted into the game. The latter doesn't create the same effect that the former does, and that effect is that when music is made exceptionally well for a game, it ties into the very being that the game is and makes it what it is. It tells you what's going on. It tells you how to feel. It can even enhance what you're already feeling. It can magnify emotions as you play. Music can stir the soul and the mind. If you're in a frantic part of a game, frantic music will make it feel all the more frantic. Emotional music will make things feel all the more emotional. And there's epic music that stirs the spirit and makes you realise that everything is on the line. You can usually tell when it's epic music when you start hearing the choir. And if they're saying Latin phrases, oh my, you know that the boss is about to become super serious. But that is besides the point. There are so many instances where I have memories attached to pieces of music more than I actually have to the game itself, and one of them immediately comes to mind. By the way, this may spoil points in Let's Plays of mine, because I'm going to be talking about certain games that I've Let's Played as well as games that I haven't. And of course I'm going to start with Mystic Quest, a game that is so very near and dear to my heart that has an absolutely beautiful soundtrack. There are only so many channels for music, they still manage to make some absolutely beautiful music. And the tracks I'm specifically referring to are the exploration themes for one. Endless Adventure and In Search of a Sacred Sword are brilliant, and they are earworms for me. They are in my head right now because I've mentioned them, and they're not going to be going away for hours. But that is no bad thing, because they are brilliant, and they conjure forth memories when I was so much younger of exploring and going around getting money, getting potions, and being stuck in the desert for absolutely ages because I couldn't figure out that riddle. That riddle! Curse you, riddle! But the tune I'm specifically referring to is the sad tune with Marcy. No matter how many times I play the game, no matter how old I am, no matter how much I know that it's coming, I guarantee to you, the final scene with Marcy will make me teary, because it's just so emotional for me, and the music makes it even more emotional. I feel for Marcy, I feel for the hero, and the situation that is just so tragic, and I'm actually starting to get a bit emotional just thinking about it, so I better move on from this one and think about some other games. Then there's Doom 1 and 2, which have music that you wouldn't think you were listening to while you were so intensely focused on trying to deal with all the demons that you're fighting, but I do listen to it quite a lot, and it too spurs me on. The music that is action-packed and bombastic makes me charge forward more confidently. The music that is more quiet, subdued, and sinister puts me on edge. The music for the Phobos Laboratory always makes me that little bit more cautious, even though I've been through the Phobos Laboratory countless times. And the second level of Episode 2 has music that always makes me nervous, even though it's not a particularly difficult level. It's more difficult on Ultraviolence, to be fair, because you have a lot less ammunition, but you do have the Berserk pack pretty much from the beginning. It still manages to convey this sense of dread and fear, and then there's music that ties together wonderfully. Whole soundtracks that are all integrated together into one complete fantastic whole. And this is usually achieved by having one major bit of music, a few chords, a theme, and most of the other tracks being variations of it, or incorporating that theme in some small way. It can be exceptionally subtle, but the result is that all the music ends up tying together wonderfully, even though you may not realize it at first, and it ends up sticking in your mind that much more. It helps, of course, if it's a good soundtrack, because you can still do that with a terrible soundtrack, but I tend to forget the bad soundtracks. I do remember the absolutely awful soundtracks. I do remember instances where music was exceptionally bad, but I'll mention those sort of things at the end. There are a few soundtracks that I'm thinking of right now that are integrally tied together like that, and one of them is Undertale. Undertale has fantastic music, and all of it is tied together, and it gives it that cohesion, and it spurs you on to play, and I've spent many an hour listening to the music of that game, even before I played it, and it's just fantastic music made all the better by these little things that connect them up together. Stonekeep also has little things that tie the tracks together. The early tunes have bits that repeat themselves in a sense in later tracks, and speaking of tracks that fill suspense, the tracks for the levels where there are no enemies. Path of the Ancients. It is so suspenseful and so nerve-wracking. When you go through that the first time, even knowing that there are no enemies, you will end up doubting that thought. You'll be thinking, are you sure there are no enemies in this? Are you positive? Because this music is telling me that there is a lingering, persistent, threatening dread that is right around the corner. That dread is not in this area, it's in the area beyond. But even so, I to this day wonder if there is an enemy there that I just haven't encountered, that nobody has encountered. This is something that has happened in games in the past where they've thought that there's nothing, and even guides have said there's nothing, and then suddenly they uncover something that is an entirely new revelation and throws everything that is known about a game up in the air. But I'm digressing, as I always do. Other games that have fantastic soundtracks. How can I talk about soundtracks without mentioning Tyrion 2000? Tyrion 2000 has, in my opinion, one of the best soundtracks of a video game ever, and I have been listening to it and loving listening to it ever since I was a teenager. It is so powerful, that music, that I dare say that the Tyrion 2000 music influenced my creative process in some fashion, changing how I write forever. That is one thing I should mention about video game music. I listen to a lot of music while I write, because I find music to be a great inspiration for writing. The caveat there is that I typically listen to music without any singing, because the singing will distract me. If there is singing, I can find myself inadvertently writing some of the words that are being sung. Not having words helps a lot, and video game music tends not to have words. That said, for what I'm currently writing here, Tyrion 2000 is not a good fit, because it's sci-fi, and what I'm writing is very distinctly fantasy, which is where games like Albion come in. Albion, you wouldn't think at first that the music sticks in your head, but the tracks so wonderfully personify where you are, like the Iskai City. The tune is just there in my head and will never go away. And Kamulos, Kamulos's track, again, stuck in my head forever. But then again, did we ever actually escape Kamulos? Some of these things, of course, may be just because I have nostalgia for these things, like the fact that I really like the music from Shadowgate for the NES, and Little Nemo's Dream Master for the NES. Both of those are very nostalgic for me. Wario Land as well, love the music for that, also very nostalgic for me. But as I said, there are games that I've never played that I really, really like the music for. There are games that I barely played or never played that I really like the music for. I haven't played Octopath, and that music is brilliant. That music is, again, another soundtrack that ties itself together, and you may think I'm bigging up all of these tracks, but I'm really not, and I had so many soundtracks in my head that I can't think of now because they're just being drowned out by all these other suggestions, like Edna and Harvey the Breakout. Absolutely brilliant. Love them. The music in Gilded Dungeoneering inspires both heroic daring do and dread when you're going through a dungeon. Ultima 9 Ascension. Now, there's a name that people didn't think I'd mention here, but it has wonderful music, and it does everything that I've been saying here that a good soundtrack should. It has music that stirs emotion. It has music that resonates with you and sticks in your memory. It has a theme that ties a lot of the major tracks together. It works. Even though Ultima 9 is a game that many people say is bad, the music is great. And that comes about because even though the music is often made in tandem with the game, it's a very different process, and good music can unfortunately be attached to games that are not good. And then there are things like the director's cut of Resident Evil with the basement theme, where you listen to it and it's a thing, and oddly enough it's still stuck in my head to this day. Not because it's good, it's not especially good, but it was definitely memorable. It was certainly a memorable thing. Then you've got Carnival Night Zone in Sonic the Hedgehog 3. Again, very memorable, but not something I would say is good. But there are people out there who would turn around and tell me that Carnival Night Zone has some of the best music in Sonic 3, or the best music in the entire franchise. And that's a point I want to emphasize now. Whether or not someone likes a game or not is based on many factors, and one of these is personal opinion. A game can be awesome, and yet it doesn't click with you for one reason or another, and the same applies to music. Music in a game can be wonderful, and you can fully acknowledge that it's brilliantly put together and it achieves what it sets out to do, stirring emotion and everything else, and yet it doesn't do that for you. It doesn't click. And that is because each person is different and each person has different likes and dislikes and different things that stir the soul. I've said stir the soul a lot, but it is important when it comes to music. And if you are not carried away by the music in a game, if it does not resonate with you where it resonates with other people, that is no bad thing. You just don't like that music. There'll be other music that you like that other people won't. Like Command & Conquer. Now, I like a lot of the Command & Conquer music, but when people say Command & Conquer and music, they immediately think of Hell March. I don't think of Hell March. I actually think of Act on Instinct from Command & Conquer 1. That is my favourite Command & Conquer piece of music. It just, when I think of that, I think of Command & Conquer. I think of the first mission of the GDI campaign. I am transported back to my childhood when I hear that tune, and it's just such a wonderful piece. All the other pieces are really good. I mean, Mechanical Man is fantastic, but it's not my favourite. And some people will look at that and go, What? What, Act on Instinct is your favourite? No, you're wrong. And it's like, but that's the thing about opinions. I'm not wrong. It's what I feel. And when it comes to music, if I prefer Act on Instinct to Hell March, I prefer Act on Instinct to Hell March. If I love the soundtrack of Tyrion 2000 more than I love the soundtrack of, say, XCOM 2, then I do. It's just different things hit different people differently. And the Realms of the Haunting soundtrack, I really like the Realms of the Haunting soundtrack. It is quiet and sinister and has that eerie sense of wrongness about it sometimes that makes it, that all the more solidifies that you are doing things that no normal person should be doing. But there'll be some people who will think that the music is entirely a non-event. And they are entitled to think that, and I am entitled to think how I think, and me liking the music doesn't detract from their not liking the music. The world still marches on. But music is such a wonderful thing. So many things can be conveyed through music, and so much emotion can be contained in music. So much memory, at least my memory, is tied to music. I remember playing games like Typhoon Thompson. Like, I could not remember the game, but I could remember the music, and so I looked up soundtracks, I looked up playlists of great Amiga music, and eventually I found Typhoon Thompson, the Chaos Engine. Fantastic music. Of course, I didn't forget that game because it's the Chaos Engine and the Bitmap Brothers, and I love the Bitmap Brothers. Speaking of the Bitmap Brothers, you have Zed, which has brilliant music as well. So many games have brilliant music, so many games have meh music as well, like the Gorgon's Alliance, Baldur's Gate 1 and 2. How have I gone this far into this video without mentioning Baldur's Gate 1 and 2? They have wonderful music. Lands of Lore 2 has really good music. Lands of Lore 3, for being as meh as it is, has wonderful music. And Phantasy Star 4, how can I even think about finishing this without talking about Phantasy Star 4? The game that came out of nowhere and surprised me with how absolutely amazing it is, becoming one of my favourite games ever. The music in that game, there's so much of it that is still there in my head. So much of it. I would mention which tracks they are, but I'm pretty sure if you're on my Discord, you already know which tracks in this game I really like. All of them, but which ones I really like, you already know. And this video, I realise, has become quite rambly and unfocused, but that tends to happen with a topic that I'm really passionate about, and I am very passionate about the music in video games. It can quite often be the music in a game that will entice me to play it. That has happened once or twice, albeit with games that were very small and very cheap. One of those games actually got me into a whole genre of music. I had never even heard of Carpenter Brut until I heard the trailer for one game. It was a very, very small game. A tiny little game. A game where the music was made before the game was, and the game was based around the music. I'm trying to remember what it was. It might have been called, like, POP, and then it had, a title afterwards. That probably isn't going to help you find it, but if you can find it, it's a very curious game, because it is the creative process for making a game almost in reverse. Music first, then game, as opposed to game and music, or game, then music. But in conclusion, and it's a bit of a rambly, we finally got their conclusion, music can make or break a game. Music can make a game fantastic, it can make a game something I don't want to play if it is very bad. Music can also be completely forgettable, and that I think is actually the biggest shame. When music is so humdrum and generic and dull that you don't remember it after you've played the game. That I think is actually worse than a game's music being bad, because a game's music being very bad, at least you remember it. Game's music being dull? That is just a shame, because it could have been something wonderful, like all the ones I've mentioned offhand, and I'm glad that music has got to the point in games where it is such a wonderful thing, where you can buy the soundtracks so easily, because back in the past it used to be very difficult to get a hold of soundtracks of video games. It used to be very, very challenging. And even now there are some games where I don't actually have a proper soundtrack for them, and I wish I did. But maybe in the future those things will be sorted. It's unlikely, admittedly, because as time goes on, these games become even older and older, and it's less likely that anyone will care to release the soundtrack for them, but I still hold out hope. And with that, I have rambled on for quite long enough, some would say, about my love of music in video games, and how it stirs my soul, how it adds to my enjoyment, how it makes my enjoyment of video games in some cases. And I hope that what I have said has resonated with you even a little bit. And I hope you feel even a tiny bit of what I do when it comes to the power of music in video games, because music is wonderful. Our world without music would be a sad, quiet place. And it will be all the poorer for it. And so, when we come back, folks, another audio-only video. What will it be about? Who knows? It is a mystery! This time it genuinely is, because it hasn't been made yet, as opposed to the mystery I claimed was in this video, which wasn't because of the title. And so, I'll catch you next time, folks, and I'll see you then. Later.